In 1978, a chance meeting between a psychopath and a sexual deviant in the U.S. prison system. Two men, both with the insatiable desire to dominate and torture, made a promise to each other. They were going to go to Los Angeles once they got out, and they were going to kill girls. This might all seem pretty horrifying on the face of it, but what these two would go on to do surpassed plain evil. Something about these two together created probably the most disturbing serial murder case we've ever had to cover on this channel. Naturally, I need to start off with a warning. The following case includes descriptions of severe abuse, torture, and crimes against minors. The content may be distressing. Please proceed with caution if you are sensitive to such material. If you crave the truth behind the cases that expose humanity's darkest corners, then subscribe to Evidence Obscured. This is the place where every case, no matter how grisly, gets dragged out into the light. With that said, this is the case of the Toolbox Killers, a serial killer duo that embodied every notion of cruelty and torture more than others. Let's get into it. Lawrence Bittaker, the youngest of the duo, had a long history of robbery, assault, and car theft. Bittaker was a typical psychopath in every sense of the word. Highly intelligent, completely captivated by his own needs and desires, and most of all, he needed excitement. When theft got boring, he moved up to carjacking, but that lost its edge too, so he upped the ante to attempted murder after stabbing a store clerk. For this crime, he was sent to the California men's colony at San Luis Obispo. It's here that he met Roy Norris. Norris was the older of the two, but he had much less self-control than his new best friend. Norris was a deviant with a frightening history of sexual assault behind him. It's Norris's obsession with possessing and dominating women that gave Bittaker his newest thrill to focus on. Together, in that prison, they talked and planned for months. They agreed that when Bittaker got released, he'd purchase a van, scope out Los Angeles, and wait for Norris to be released so that they could put their master plan into action. There were specifics that they wanted. They wanted to kidnap girls between the ages of 13 and 19 because they'd be easier to dominate. Bittaker made it clear that no girl was to survive. Every one of their victims had to die so that there would be no witnesses. And they'd take girls at random. They needed to make sure that their victims weren't connected to them at all. In October of '78, Bittaker was released. 3 months later, Norris joined him. By then, Bittaker had already bought the silver 1977 GMC cargo van that they named Murder Mac, because psychos find that kind of irony funny. In those first 5 months, they picked up dozens of kids, simply to see how easy it would be and what kinds of behaviors they needed to avoid that would tip the girls off that something was amiss. They installed a bed into the back of the van, and behind the front seat, they added a cooler and a toolbox. They also used that time to search for secluded areas where they take their victims. It's on one of these reconnaissance missions that they discovered a sealed fire road that led into the San Gabriel Mountains. Breaking open the lock was no sweat, now that they had the means, a place where they could never be seen, and now all they needed was a victim. The plan was simple. One of them would hide in the back, and when the driver told the girls to get a drink from the cooler, the guy hiding would pull her into the back as she reached for the drinks. When she started to scream, the driver would turn the volume on the radio as high as it could go and hightail it out to the mountain roads where there was more room and privacy. On June the 24th, Lucinda Lynn Schaefer walked back from a fellowship meeting at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Redondo Beach. The 16-year-old ignored Norris when he pulled up next to her with offers of a lift and some beer. Instead of leaving Cindy be, he pulled up a few yards away, opened the sliding door, and pretended to be looking for something in the back. When Cindy walked past the door, Norris grabbed her and forced her inside. Bittaker turned up the volume and drove off while Norris tied Cindy up in the back. From what we later learned, Cindy stopped screaming when she realized that they were driving out of the city. Throughout the torture that she was about to endure, she never lost control of her composure. Cindy's remarkable calm and strength in those circumstances was so unexpected that Norris made a point of mentioning it several times in later interviews. When they got to the forest, Norris took Cindy into the woods to, well, you can just imagine what he did to her. When he was done, Bittaker took his turn. For 2 hours, Cindy did not cry once. She did not beg, and she did not allow fear to take away her sanity. When Norris took her into the woods for a second time, she asked him if she could pray before they killed her. But Norris did not give Cindy her one and only request. He attempted to strangle her, but her terrified, bulging eyes disturbed him so much that he ran off to vomit behind the van. So Bittaker took over. He tied a coat hanger around Cindy's neck and tightened it with a pair of pliers until she stopped convulsing and lay still. Cindy's body was thrown into a canyon with the hopes that wild animals would eat and spread her remains. If all of this sounds unimaginably cruel, this is nothing compared to what was to come. Of all the victims, Cindy was tortured the least. A month later, on July the 18th, they snatched 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall. After assaulting her for hours in the mountains, they made Andrea walk up a hill naked. They took Polaroids of her that later caused the jury that convicted them to seek mental health assistance. Bittaker told Andrea to list as many reasons as she could for them to spare her life. Andrea begged, she pleaded, and she cried. But Bittaker continued to torture her until that evening by using pliers to tear off pieces of her flesh before he thrust an ice pick in her ear and into her brain. Andrea was somehow still alive, so he turned her around and did the same to the other ear, this time stomping on her head until the ice pick's handle broke off. Still, Andrea was alive, but she was in no condition to fight off Bittaker anymore. He strangled her to death and threw her body over a cliff. Don't get me wrong, Norris was in every way a willing participant, but he was there mostly for sexual gratification. Bittaker, on the other hand, reveled in his victims' fear, he enjoyed their screams of pain, and he absolutely needed to see them suffer as much as possible. When they kidnapped 15-year-old Jackie Doris Gilliam and 13-year-old Jacqueline Lee Lamb in September, Bittaker had an entirely new set of torture planned out in advance. Their friends were hitchhiking and happily accepted the ride. When they realized that the men were driving out of the city, the girls fought back so hard that they had to stop the van on the side of the road to subdue them. It took a rock to the head and a punch to the face to get Jacqueline down. That little girl was so ferocious in her fight to survive that they nearly had to kill her just to get her tied up. For 2 days, they were held hostage in the mountains. Bittaker took an audio tape recorder along so that he could forever capture their screams of pain. If the girls got too quiet, he'd stab them with ice picks and tore pieces of their breasts off with vice grip pliers, just so they'd scream for his tape. They took more Polaroids and subjected the girls to so much torture that it's a miracle that they even survived those 2 days. Jackie was killed with an ice pick in the ear to render her comatose, and then Bittaker strangled her. But little Jacqueline wasn't done fighting just yet. Bittaker tried to strangle her, but she was adamant to stay alive. In the end, Bittaker choked her while Norris beat her over the head with a sledgehammer. Bittaker liked to play the tapes of their victims' screams in the car instead of music after this point. After all this, you'd think that Bittaker couldn't possibly think up worse methods of torture, but he was just getting started. They tried to abduct another teenager, Robin Robeck, from Manhattan Beach, but Robin managed to escape. They dragged her into the van and assaulted her with the music on full blast to mask her screams. Robin managed to break free when Norris and Bittaker were switching seats. She didn't stop to get the plate, and with the pepper spray that they used to blind her, she simply couldn't see enough to give police a very detailed description. Police were disturbed by the amount of physical trauma that Robin had endured, so they kept the case at the forefront even if they had no leads. They then abducted 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford on October 31st from a gas station. Lynette accepted the ride because she knew Bittaker from her waitressing job at the local McDonald's that Bittaker frequented. For an hour, Norris drove that van while Bittaker beat Lynette with his fist, with a hammer, and tortured her with those pliers that had now become his favorite tool for torture. By the time the van stopped, Lynette was so badly injured that the back of the van was soaked in blood. Norris took the sledgehammer and brought it down on her arm 26 times, shattering the bone to a million pieces. By the time her 3-hour ordeal was done, Bittaker and Norris both agreed that this was the most brutal of all their killings. Lynette was in such bad shape that she didn't even react to being strangled to death. it was Norris who killed her because Bittaker decided that it was his turn to kill someone for a change. Bittaker didn't like that their victims were going unnoticed, however. He wanted some attention for what he'd done. He insisted that they display her body on a bed of ivy on the front lawn of a random house in a Sunland neighborhood. Lynette's torture death was a huge story the moment her body was found. Even in LA, where several serial killers were operating at that time, the level of brutality was so extreme that everyone took notice. It would probably have been years before police even realized that there were serial murders happening at all if it weren't for Norris's loose lips. When he met up with another newly released prisoner from the California men's colony, he just couldn't help himself. He bragged about the women they tortured and killed, spilled every detail down to the attack on Robin. The ex-con didn't believe a word of any of it. That's until he saw the news about the brutal and horrific torture murder of Lynette. He went to police immediately. Armed with this information, police gave Robin a lineup of mugshots. She picked out Bittaker in seconds. Both men were put under surveillance and arrested for drug possession before the week was out. Norris was arrested first, allowing Bittaker to clean the car and dispose of the tapes and some of the Polaroids before he got arrested too. Even after Bittaker destroyed most of the evidence, they still found plenty of Polaroids, blood-covered tools and sledgehammer, 2 necklaces and a bracelet that belonged to the victims, and syringes and acid that Bittaker planned to use on their next victim. And then they found the only remaining tape that Bittaker missed in the glove compartment. Lynette's mother had to listen to her daughter's final moments of hell to identify the screams on the tape as Lynette's. Norris caved first, admitted to everything when he was confronted with the evidence. He tried to make it seem like Bittaker was the instigator, the planner, and the sole killer of all the girls, and that he was only guilty of assaulting them and helping to dispose of the bodies, and that he only did it because he was afraid that Bittaker would kill him. Unfortunately, he was willing to testify against Bittaker, and that saved him from the death penalty. Personally, I think it's a travesty that that man got the opportunity to apply for parole if he wanted to. He got 45 to life, and he died in prison in 2020 of natural causes. Bittaker, well, that psycho wasn't going to be so straightforward. He denied everything.
Did you at any time ever use an ice pick?
No, sir.
You struck Miss Lamp with a sledgehammer. Do you recall the sledgehammer which was introduced?
Yes, sir, I recall it.
Was that true?
No, sir.
Bittaker claimed that Lynette's screams on those tapes were because they'd paid her for sex, and she willingly agreed to scream theatrically for them to record her as part of some fetish game. He smiled in the court when the torture tapes were being played. He found the jury and the audience's horrified weeping humorous.
People rushed outside and vomited.
He was found guilty on all accounts and sentenced to death. But Bittaker was about to make a complete nuisance of himself to the prison system. He appealed his sentence every chance he got and tried to sue the prison more than 40 times for trivial and imaginary transgressions like giving him a soggy sandwich or receiving a broken cookie for lunch. Even after he got barred from filing any more lawsuits, he still managed to keep his death row in the courts until the day he died of natural causes on December the 13th, 2019, at the age of 79. But there's one last thing I didn't mention. Among those terrible tapes and Polaroids were 500 other photos, all of them depicting girls from the local high school and hanging out at beaches. Every one of those 500 photos were examined and the girls identified, all except for 20. 19 of the girls were definitely identified as missing teenagers, and the last photo was of a girl photographed in those mountains where the other 5 were taken. Police haven't gone into details, but they did admit that she was photographed in a vulnerable state, suggesting that she was in some state of distress. Neither Norris nor Bittaker have ever admitted knowing, seeing, or having attacked any of the girls they photographed. Most of those kids didn't even know 2 killers were taking their photos. But those 19 missing girls and the one who was taken to the mountains, I refuse to believe that 2 of the worst killers known to the USA had no hand in their disappearance. Since only Cindy and Andrea's partial remains were ever found, and there wasn't much left to be honest, and those canyons are impossibly huge, well, who knows how many women they actually killed? They would only talk about those that had physical evidence linked to them. We have no idea how much more evidence Bittaker managed to destroy or how many tapes and Polaroids there truly were. I don't think that they could have killed 20 more women in those 5 months. But I'm certain that monsters that were as utterly addicted to seeing others suffer as they were could not have contained their appetites for long. I'm certain that there are more bodies in those canyons. All we can do now is wonder how many more suffered the excruciating deaths that Jackie, Jacqueline, Lynette, Cindy, and Andrea had to endure. With that nightmare fuel to haunt me tonight, I say goodnight to you too. Remember, there are monsters everywhere. See you in the next one, people.